Good evening, I'm Barkha Dutt. You're with the Mojo Story. Our big focus today is on the economy as the GDP is showing record figures, a record jump. But how do we read between the lines of this data? What are the numbers actually telling us? Let's bring up our big story on the program this evening. We're looking at a 20% hike in GDP, but we're asking, what does the data tell us? Since the 1990s, we have not seen such a dramatic jump in numbers, but despite these numbers, the economy is still well below the level at which it was before the pandemic hit us. In fact, it's still at a minus 9% level compared to the pre-pandemic levels. Still, the government is hoping and is arguing that this could be the beginning of what it has called a V-shaped recovery. Despite that, unemployment figures or the inflation figures, or indeed the most recent decision to increase the prices of cooking gas, tell their own story. Economists are divided on how to read this dramatic jump in the GDP figures, and the opposition is targeting the government. Rahul Gandhi says GDP rise means a rise in petrol and gas. The economy has become a political battlefield. But on this broadcast today, we'll try and separate the rhetoric from the reality and read, as we said, between the lines to ask what the health of the economy is truly like. That will be a big focus on the program today. We'll be asking experts and political voices alike on how they measure the health of the economy. Let's bring up our guests on the program today. We're joined by Gurcharan Das, who's of course an economist, an author, a public intellectual. Welcome, Gurcharan. Welcome back. It's great to have you with us. Ashwani Mahajan ji is with us. He leads the Swadeshi Jagran Manch, otherwise an affiliate, as it were, of the Sangh Parivar, but often very dispassionate, especially when it comes to economic issues. We're also joined by Anshul Avijit. He's a spokesperson with the Congress Party. And Professor Arun Kumar, well-known economist, is with us. We're also hoping to have Gopal Agarwal of the BJP running a bit late, but I'm sure he'll connect into the program as soon as he is ready. Let me start with you, Gurcharan. If you were to step back and just look at this dramatic jump, what's being called almost a world record in an increase in GDP, is it to you a sign of things getting better, or would you say, as ICRA, the ratings agency, has said, that these numbers are deceptively high?
Well, the fact of the matter is that when I saw the number for the first time, I sighed with relief, because this was the period of the second wave. And frankly, with all the tragedy that was around us, the people having lost their job, the hurt to the informal economy, wages, cutting down, I just thought that we were going down the tube. But so it's a relief, actually, that we have rebounded. Now, it's a good sign, but we have to put it in perspective. As you said yourself, this has come against a low base of last year when the economy had shrunk 24% or so. So it's really 3% improvement on that. But it's 9% below what we were in COVID. Now,
but you use the word rebound. I want to jump in. You use the word rebound. Do you believe the economy is showing signs of rebounding, or do you believe the denominator is so low that what you're coming back from is a misleading way to measure improvement, which is what ICRA has argued?
No, actually, you're absolutely right. The fact that I think there's no cause for triumphalism. I mean, the people who are saying this is ready for a V-shaped recovery, I think they're, I hope it happens, but they're jumping the gun. The good news here is that there are sectors which have shown strength, like agriculture. Agriculture has gone up. It's a non-pandemic sector. There was no lockdown, and it has gone up 4.5%. And after growing at this about 3.5% last year. So it's for agriculture to do that. It's very good. Then I think the numbers in construction and retail, which are labor intensive sectors where jobs, are involved, they have they have shown some improvement. Of course, much more to go. Then inflation, which was running very high, has come down now in under the six barrier. It's still at the high end, 5.59 or something, and one should be concerned, but that is also done. So what I'm trying to say here is that it's while we shouldn't be triumphant, we shouldn't be also excessively pessimistic. I said rebound because it shows that the economy has shown the ability to recover, which
Okay.
frankly I was very skeptical of. Uh,
Okay. In a moment from now, I'm going to open this up, but I do have to ask you what has happened in the last 24 hours, which is the second hike in the price of cooking gas in 15 days, right? Gurcharan, and cooking gas (LPG) is something that affects
yeah.
many more Indians than we can even count. How do you see the decision, to hike LPG again by close to 25 rupees?
I haven't personally followed this particular thing, but clearly it doesn't seem to be a good thing. Um, the We should pay for what things cost, but I think in our case there is an element of an excise duty on petroleum products, and that is responsible. I mean, that we could either easily, maneuver. So I'm not in favor of something like that. Uh, what I am trying to say, though, Barkha, is that look, an economy an economy runs on four wheels, and you have private consumption, which is one wheel, and India's growth story is based on that. But now, at this point, we can't count on it. We are still, the third wave may come. We don't know. Vaccination, only a quarter of India has been vaccinated with the first dose. So
Yeah.
it, it's too early. The
Okay.
second area of driving, sorry, I'm quickly going to go through these four. The second area is private investment. Now, private investment, unless demand grows, you still have a lot of idle capacity. So that's not something we can count on. Third is exports. Now, exports did well in this last quarter, but we have too many problems with exports.
Okay.
We are uncompetitive in exports, and it's been made worse by raising the tariffs. The rupee has appreciated, so I don't think we can count on exports. The only thing we can count on now is government spending. Government spending, and I would say that's the weakness. It has grown 5.4% or something, but that's what we have to drive. In infrastructure spending will create jobs, which will crowd in private investment, which will
Okay.
create more
I
jobs.
have to I have to jump in here. What I'm hearing you say, and I want to take this to Ashwani Mahajan, is that we're seeing the beginnings of recovery, but we can't be triumphal and say this is the beginning of V-shaped recovery. The opposition feels very differently. Economists are divided. I want to first bring in Ashwani Mahajan. Ashwini ji, how do you see the economic decisions of a government that you otherwise are ideologically affiliated to, but have often disagreed with on economic policy? How do you, for example, see the decision to hike the prices of cooking gas yet again?
You see, Barkha, let us concentrate on the GDP numbers first, and then we can talk about the price hikes. And in fact, we must understand that why there is a periodic hike in the prices of petroleum products is less due to the central government's decisions. In fact, it is basically the uh, the states not agreeing to the GST in petroleum products. So we must understand that this hike in petroleum products, whether it is diesel or petrol or these LPG, It is the booty is being taken over by both center and states. So if even if it is, say, something extraordinarily being taken away from the consumers, it is both. So I think in this federal system, the center and states both have to sit together, see how we can give relief to the consumers. So that is the one part of the story. And now we come to the GDP part. And in fact, I feel that these GDP numbers are telling so many things. One, that those who are saying that the economy has gone to the very bottom level, and recovery will be difficult, and the questions were being raised about the shape of the recovery. I don't argue on the V shape or the U shape or whatever shape. But what we see from these numbers is something really spectacular. Say, I was just having a look at the numbers of GDP, and it was to my surprise that the sales of commercial vehicles increased by 234%. The sales of private vehicles increasing by I understand there was a pent up demand, and that is really doing this wonder. Private vehicles 110%, cargo handled at airports 118%. You see, I'm not talking of only the passengers handled at airport. Obviously, that number would have increased. But if we see the net tons kilometer railway had handled is 52.7% increase. And construction, if you see construction is I think up by how much? It is really great. So and 49% increase in manufacturing. And in fact,
Okay.
I think the policies of the government during these pandemics, it was very difficult, as Gurcharan was saying, that government spending is very important. And when the government is not getting revenue, GST is down, income tax is down, everything is down. So spending is very difficult, and obviously and that has given rise to the fiscal deficit, and that would get reflected in the even in
So
the
what do these numbers tell you, Ashwani ji? The big picture, the macro picture from these numbers, before I go to Anshul Avijit, is what?
Yeah. Big picture is that the economy has definitely come out of the blues, and you see all sectors doing. Some sectors are doing extremely better than the others, and as Gurcharan was saying, the agriculture which was not impacted by the pandemic has also done good. So,
Yeah.
so the big picture is that we are coming out of the blues, and the numbers of unemployment which your screen is showing, definitely we are going to we are going to get benefited even even in terms of the unemployment.
Okay,
So,
let me bring in, let me bring in Anshul Avijit of the Congress Party on this. Anshul, Rahul Gandhi's press conference targeted the government specifically on the increase of cooking gas, but did not accept the GDP figures to actually reflect a healthier economy. How do you look at these figures and argue otherwise? I agree with the health warnings by both Ashwani Mahajan and Gurcharan Das that it's not a basis for triumphalism. There are structural issues. There is it's going to be time before you get to the pre-pandemic levels. But as an Indian, why do these numbers not give you some sigh of relief, Anshul?
Well, first of all, Barkha, where is the government spending? Where is the fiscal deficit? I mean, the tax collections seem to have increased by 2 lakh crores, according to the latest figures that have come out. But actually, government expenditures fallen by 5%. It was earlier 4.63 lakh crores. Now it's 4.21 lakh crores. I mean, there's a massive decline. I mean, that's the whole problem. Where is the fiscal deficit? I'll come to that in a moment. Another quick point. I mean, we're all talking about, the rebound and the recovery. The word I would like to use is some form of resumption of economic activity, right? Because even if you look at what we hold in very high esteem, the Nomura, Indian Business Resumption Index, it's about some form of resuming of business activity. It nowhere points to some form of recovery. Secondly, it's not going to be an inclusive recovery. The GDP, as we know, is high frequency data, right? Where is the informal sector reflected in this data? There is a big talk about V and K shape. I'm not really into alphabets, but for the sake of making this simpler, we should go into that. Yesterday, the chief economic advisor kept insisting, as if he was trying to convince us, that it's a V-shaped recovery. I mean, he kept saying it on and on again and again. I mean, he said a number of bizarre things over the past couple of months. I'll go to that a bit later on. But, at this point, as if he was trying to tell us, and then he was pointing to the stock markets, and we know how brittle and fickle they are. Even if Jerome Powell sneezes, I mean, there is going to be some kind of panic, sort of terminal panic in the stock market.
So let me ask you to detail what your argument is, right? One thing is to say is that it's not inclusive growth. In other words, the most marginal groups are suffering. The other thing is to say you don't believe the data, right? The fact is that both things can be simultaneously true. You can make the argument that there is some recovery, but the recovery hasn't gone deep into the roots of the groups that really need it. Which argument are you making, Anshul?
No, I'm saying there is some resumption of economic activity. That is clear by the data. The data itself, the way we calculate our GDP, and there's a long debate about that, and we're not going to go into that, is certainly not reflective of the informal sector, which has suffered adversely during this pandemic. We know it. I will tell you the data regarding that. 23 crore people below the poverty line, according to Azim Premji University. Unemployment figures are really high. Urban employment is really high. CIME figures, I know the government doesn't believe in it. That's the other problem with statistics. The government doesn't believe in CIME data because the chief economic advisor has time and again said, there's something wrong with the methodology. I don't agree with it when it doesn't suit him. You look at urban unemployment, rural unemployment, disguised unemployment in the rural sector because of migration. I mean, there's extreme distress in the rural sector. Our per capita GDP now less than 1 lakh. All economic indicators are terrible. And they were so even in the year which we compare it to, which is the pre-pandemic year on which we are comparing all this Q1 data to and saying that.
Okay, let me just ask Professor Arun Kumar to add his perspective. Professor Arun Kumar, there are many ways to slice up the same data, but you can't escape from the fact that we're in a better position today, would you agree, than we were last year? I mean, everything is relative right now. So, of course, we're not at the pre-pandemic levels. Of course, that's an obvious. No one can say that, at -9% to the pre-pandemic level, you have recovered and bounced back to the pre-COVID levels. But are we showing signs of recovery, or are we only showing signs of resumption, as Anshul is arguing?
So, Barkha, it's wrong to compare rates of growth when the actual economy is declined. What we need to do is compare the levels at which we are. And that's what I think others are saying, that the level has not recovered back to 2019. Now, not only has it not recovered back to 2019, there was to be 2 years of growth. Suppose, we take 3.1%, which was the last quarter before the pandemic, then not only the economy is down 9%, but it would have taken another 7% further up, assuming 3.1%. So we are roughly down about 16-17% compared to where the economy should have been, if the pandemic had not hit us.
Can you explain that?
Yeah. So, in the last quarter, before the pandemic, the quarterly rate of growth had come to 3.1%, So if you add 3.1 and 3.1, so that'll be about 7% rate of growth, and add that, to about the 9% that is less compared to 2019. So you're roughly about 16-17% less than where the economy would have been if the pandemic had not hit us, So that's the point number one, that the economy, should be compared not just to 2019, but also to where it would have been. And it has not recovered to that extent, that we can say that the economy has rebounded.
Do you see the beginnings? Do you see the beginnings of recovery?
Yeah. So I'm coming to that. So the second point about data is that last year in the Q1, when the lockdown had taken place, If you look at the MOSPI, press release, it said we did not collect the data in this period, and therefore this data is not comparable to what it was in 2019. So when they said 24% decline in 2020 as compared to 2019 Q1, that's not correct. Now, if the data for Q1 of last year was not there, and that had to be revised, and there was no data collection, then this data is also not comparable. So neither is the 20% comparable to 24%, nor is the 24% comparable to the earlier one.
Okay, okay. So then I'm really confused. So you're saying
So
that you don't even think that on a relative scale, this 20% figure is something you accept?
yes, and the reason why I'm saying that is because the unorganized sector got hit very badly, and this was a shock to the economy. So the organized sector has recovered, but we don't know how much the unorganized sector has recovered, which is the point that is being made by the other panelists. And therefore, my
Okay.
own suspicion is that it's not 20% because the unorganized sector has not recovered as compared to last time, because that is where the pandemic hit most. It's in agriculture, in the rural areas, in tier one, tier two cities that the pandemic hit. So therefore, the recovery in the unorganized sector is far less than what it is in the organized
Okay.
sector. And
Okay.
that's why
Let's
I
hope.
would say, that's why
Yeah,
my
sorry.
argument would be that even agriculture has not recovered. Because if you look at
Okay.
the MOSPI press release yesterday, and you look at the MOSPI's press release last year, they say we did not collect the data. Okay, and in agriculture, we knew that last year poultry suffered because egg production declined because 1 crore eggs are used in midday meal scheme which were not used. People stopped eating chicken because they were worried that they would get infected. Then flowers could not come to the market, vegetables and fruits could not come to the market. Azadpur Mandi got less than half the produce it used to get in the 2019. So even agriculture declined by 10%. So our data did not reflect the decline in agriculture last
Okay.
year. It's not
Okay. Let
reflecting
me
the
let
decline in
me.
agriculture this year. So
So
therefore, the
two
data itself is incorrect.
So two completely differing perspectives on this conversation. And Gurcharan and Ashwani Mahajan, I'd like to bring you back in. What I'm hearing from both Professor Arun Kumar and our Congress representative is the following. The data starting point is problematic for Arun Kumar. He doesn't believe that the data tells the full story. He thinks we're actually looking at not -9%, but -16% sort of shortfall there. And secondly, the argument that where is the government spending? Structurally, there's a problem. This is still an economy in decline. Gurcharan, let's start with you first.
Well, its question is what words do you want to use? I certainly wasn't in a triumphalist position. I wasn't thinking that we are on our way to a weak recovery. What I was suggesting is that that we have begun to recover. Now, whether you want to use the word, maybe rebound is not the word. I think we are stuck with words to some extent, but there is surprisingly economic activity when one had the worst. Second wave was the worst. Fortunately, it was the states only they were locked down individually in individual portions. We didn't have a national lockdown, and that I think has saved us.
Yeah.
The question that I really think we should be discussing, I think Arun Kumar is right. We don't have a measure of the informal economy. So he can say one thing, somebody else can say one other thing. We don't know. And one of the tragedies of our country's economy is that a very large portion of it is still informal. That itself, I think, is a failure. It's a failure of the last 70 years, but we have to face that failure. And it's another discussion, I'm sure. But that queers the pitch. However,
Okay. Hmm.
however, I would just say that I disagree with the gentleman from the Swadeshi Jagran Manch. I forgot his
Dr.
fine name.
Ashwani Mahajan. Ashwani
Ashwin,
Mahajan.
Dr. Mahajan. Now,
Yes.
you were saying where would the money come from for government spending? Because that is the secret now to
Yeah.
to push the recovery. And the reality is that the government revenues are in pretty good shape. I
Hmm.
mean, I don't think the problem is not the money. The we've been collecting money right through, and the problem is the inability of the government to push. They should at least push the half finished infrastructure projects. Now, with
Right.
this new monetization, maybe that will happen. But that if the government single-mindedly, you can't depend. Eventually, jobs will be created by the private sector, clearly. But the government can push it through infrastructure. And it's the proven way. It's the proven way to create jobs. And I would say that we should not even raise the question where the money is come from. Now, I'm not in the position where the
Okay.
Congress party is, which is says borrow and spend, borrow and spend. No, I'm not saying. Let's be
Okay.
responsible.
But you think the government has enough revenue to increase spending? I can
Yeah,
see,
and I
I
think
can see. Yeah, let me just get Ashwani Mahajan to come in there. I can also see Mr. Gopal Krishna Agarwal, chartered accountant by training, leader of the BJP, with us. But Ashwani ji, first you, then Anshul, and then I'll just get Gopal ji to come in. Ashwani.
See, again, uh, I must say, I don't agree with Gurcharan ji that this is this is unfortunate that our economy is more informal. In fact, it's all, if there are informal sectors, they are not by design. They are there by virtue of being this kind of. It's not by design, Gurcharan ji. And if the informal sector is there, that is not that informal, that unorganized as people now, try to put it. And this is the sector which is giving us a lot of employment. And obviously, as the economy rebounds, it recovers. Obviously, these sectors will also come up.
What
And there's
concerns you right now, Ashwani ji? What concerns you right now the most?
Uh, I think the what I feel is that economy uh, is recovering, and with the efforts of the government, especially on the manufacturing side, we need to push it further, because our manufacturing has, as I've been saying on your show
Yeah.
previously also, that Chinese competition, and that was a kind of unequal competition from the Chinese side, because of the dumping and other things and illegal practices of Chinese. And this time the government is on the right track when
Okay.
when the when the government is imposing higher tariffs. Gurcharan ji may not agree with me, but that is the way forward. Increasing tariffs and imposing anti-dumping duties, or other measures like production-linked incentive schemes. About 2 lakh crores the government is going to spend in the next few years to bring up the manufacturing back, and that is the way forward, because if the employment can come, it can come from manufacturing. Obviously, services can't provide you that much of employment, and already overcrowded agriculture can't. Therefore, if the unemployment numbers are to be reduced, it has to come from manufacturing, and that is possible only by a big push by the
Okay.
government, which the government presently is doing. I think Gopal will be able to
Yeah.
throw more light on that. Thank you.
And I'll come to Gopal in just a moment. I just want to bring in Anshul's perspective as an opposition member. Anshul, go ahead. And one thing you didn't address is that states too have to bear the responsibility for both petrol prices, and GST when it comes to the whole debate around petrol and LPG. Go ahead, Anshul.
No. First, I want to address this problem because the government's approach is all wrong. It's a fundamental wrong approach in macroeconomic policy. The government thinks the supply will create its own demand. I mean, this classical economics, that's not going to happen. It hasn't happened so far. Since the Prime Minister said those fatal words, Atmanirbhar Abhiyan, nothing has happened. And even now, the government is refusing to hedge its bets. So until the government, it keeps focusing on this kind of supply side monetary policy and keeps thinking it's going to work. I mean, the RBI has done its bit. I mean, it's completely, the forbearance and, all kinds of regulatory rules and relief and all that. But, that will cause inflation as well. I mean, why doesn't it simply have a supply side, a demands-based, fiscal stimulus that will increase demand and therefore focus on the real economy, which is jobs and output? Because unless there is demand, output will not increase, and that won't give employment. And as for the this question about petrol, I mean, enough has been said about Barkha. The finance minister came up with an absolutely absurd statement some time back, blaming the high excise duty on petrol on government policy and COVID bonds. And next day, a number of editorials in all newspapers, I mean, even the pink papers,
Yeah.
refuted that, saying it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's morally wrong. When a time when the population of this country is reeling under the pandemic and under poverty, to give such a statement, they debunk it
Okay.
right away. I don't even have to do
Okay.
that. And there's shortage of funds in the shortage of funds in the state. They have to work together. Why should it be the onus on the states? I mean, somebody lights the fire and somebody douses it. I
Let
mean,
me
that
get
can't be the
let let me get Gopal Agarwal of the BJP now to respond to this. Mr. Agarwal, you joined us late, but there is a dispute here on how to read the 20% GDP. Professor Arun Kumar believes that not just are we 9% below pre-pandemic levels, we're actually 16% below pre-pandemic levels if you were to measure what the economy could have grown to. Your response, and also simultaneously, we've seen this massive jump in cooking gas prices, the second hike in 15 days. Please go ahead, Gopalji.
Thank you, Barkha ji. I could not hear Mr. Arun Kumar and Mr. Gurcharan Singh. I heard some part of it. Basically, what we have to say here is that surely this growth of 20% is based on a base which was lower. So
Yeah.
we have to accept this reality that the pandemic had impacted our economic growth, and we did see a fall in the economic growth. But the thing is, what we are very happy and would like to mention here is that the economic cycle is showing strong signs of recovery, and that is on the back of certain measures by our government, which are pro reforms and are in the right direction. If you look into the manufacturing sector, it is also showing a recovery. It at present, we are not saying that everything in the economic growth has been achieved by us. Pandemic has caused a serious problem into various sectors, but the government effort is on the right direction. Whether it is on the PLI side, the impact of production linked incentive schemes is now showing on the ground. There is a positive sentiment by the manufacturing sector, and the investment climate by the private sector is increasing. Even earlier, the whole growth was based on government spending. Now, government investment. Now, in this quarter and earlier, some of the results show that private investment is also building up. Second thing is there is a positive sentiment and confidence from the international investors also, and the effort by the government on focusing on manufacturing sector which can provide employment is
Yeah.
the important indicator is that recently India has come to the occupy second position in the manufacturing, surpassing US. Man,
Okay.
uh,
So
uh,
how do you reconcile this 20% GDP with the retail inflation figures, with how expensive cooking gas is, Gopalji?
So there are two challenges that we recognize. Important thing in economics is whether the government is aware of the challenges and is moving in the right direction. There are two challenges: inflation, which has been pointed out by the RBI.
Yes.
Government is aware that inflation is a strong issue which has to be kept under check, and at present, though inflation is around 6% and it is on the upper side, but still it is under control, and RBI is looking into it whether to suck liquidity from the system, or there are multiple ways through which inflation has to be taken care of. One thing is sucking. Can RBI suck the liquidity which it has infused post-pandemic to support the industries and businesses? One thing, but that can become a counterproductive in the supply side because it can create constraint on the supply side. So the government has also to look into increasing the supply side also. Consumption is also an issue because consumption was due to pandemic and other thing has come down, but it is moving up, and the
Okay.
government is compensating that individual consumer consumption from government spending, whether in infrastructure or
Okay.
other things. So the inflation, we are monitoring it and will look into, but we'll focus more on the increasing the supply side to manage the inflation and not suck liquidity suddenly from the system. And the employment is another important challenge, where we think that the manufacturing has to improve, and all the efforts of our government is to create
Okay.
an ecosystem of manufacturing friendly policies, whether
Let
it
let
is
me let
industrial policy, logistic policy. So
okay.
logistic policy focus,
Let
manufacturing
me
focus. Yeah.
got that. Let me get Professor Arun Kumar to respond, and then after that, I will take last comments. Unfortunately, Gopalji joined us a bit late. Go ahead, Arun Kumar.
Yeah, so if we want to reduce petroleum goods prices, it's really dependent on the taxation. It's not really international prices. If the government wants to do, it can reduce the taxes now. Doesn't have to wait for GST, because under GST, if you put it under 28%, you would have reduced the tax rate. So it's really a question of why is it that the government is raising these prices, especially this quarter. The tax collections have been very good. GST is far greater than earlier. Corporate tax collection is better because corporate profits are higher. And this is where I think we need to look at inflation more carefully. The corporates have got the pricing power, and that's why, in spite of wages decreasing, they're raising prices, and that's why the corporate profits are doing very well. So that's something that we need to look at. Second point that I want to make is that even in January 2020, 21, when the government said the rate of growth had become positive 1.6%, capacity utilization in the organized sector had declined by 10% compared to January 2020. That means the formal sector is showing growth, but actually is declining. That means there's something wrong with the data. Second point is the unorganized sector demand has shifted to the organized sector, and that's why the unorganized sector is declining, the organized sector is rising. So that's why I'm arguing the rate of growth is not 20%, it's much less. But yes, the impact of the second wave was not as bad as was expected to be. But we need to worry about the tier 2 cities, the tier 3 cities, the rural areas where the pandemic had spread. That data has not yet come. So we need to really worry about that what is happening there is that the quarterly data is based only on mostly the organized sector data and agriculture. The unorganized
Gopal,
sector data just doesn't come in. And because it's a shock, it's not the usual revision of data that will take place. It's a shock to the economy. And in a shock, you cannot revise the data in the normal sense that people can do.
I think one of the lessons. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
The government expenditure, if you look at the data this quarter, government expenditure has not risen. Actually, subsidies have been cut back, revenues are higher, and that's where the deficit has come down. If the deficit comes down, then the demand generation from the government comes down. Similarly, the imports have risen, exports have not risen as much. That means even the external sector is not giving a boost. So where do you get the boost from? Government is not giving a boost. Exports are not giving a boost.
Let me get Gopal, Krishna Agarwal to respond to that. The fact that the data for Professor Kumar is not completely plausible. The second that we don't know is that the national lockdown had really gravely hurt and maybe because there wasn't a national lockdown in pan-India lockdown in the second wave, maybe something was salvaged. Mr. Agarwal, please respond.
Barkha ji, I would just say that whatever Mr. Arun Kumar has, you are able to hear me? Yeah. Whatever Mr. Arun Kumar is
I'm sorry,
out,
I can't. Okay.
Hello? You are not getting my voice.
Yeah, Mr. Agarwal. Sorry, Mr. Agarwal, just repeat that. We lost you briefly. Just repeat that, please.
Whatever Mr. Arun Kumar is pointing out, these are the problems which have been created by the pandemic, and the government is working to remove that. But the thing is, our target is to move from informal economy to the formal economy. Government has also required. The issue is if the government has to spend for the welfare, if the government has to spend to create infrastructure, it needs resources. Economics is not what the government alone wants. It's whatever the ground situations are. Within that situation, what best decision the government can take and has taken that's very important. So the thing is, if we are going for monetization, that is to create resources for the government to create infrastructure, bring investment from international communities and domestic manufacturers, domestic infrastructure builders into the community, into that sector. These are the way government can generate revenues if direct tax and indirect tax are reduced, getting reduced, collection is coming down. So petroleum and other are the sources where the government is creating
Right.
resources. So we have to understand that within given situation, if the government is taking the right decision or not. These constraints are very well there in the system. We are moving in a direction where economy is
Okay.
moving and government is spending its political capital. We can also go for a populist decision that reduce petroleum prices.
Yeah.
But neither petroleum prices are being reduced, so that government requires resources. A monetization scheme has been announced. These are all to generate resources and create
Okay, let me just
one
jump
side.
in. Let me just jump in here because I've just got a couple of minutes left. Gurcharan Das, the fact is that you have reports, let's say by Oxfam, that make the point that since March last year, there's been an increase of 12,97,822 crores in the wealth of 100 billionaires. And on the other hand, you see a 25 rupee increase in the prices of cooking gas. Now, if you see this kind of inequality rising as it has in the pandemic years, it becomes very difficult for any government to actually justify increasing the prices of something as basic as cooking gas. You've heard Gopal Agarwal saying, look, we're doing the best we can within confines. We're not being populist. Your last thoughts?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. This inequality is not at all something that we want, obviously. And a lot of people who had climbed into the middle class have now fallen as a result of the pandemic. And that's a great tragedy of this time. The solution to this is not the solution of just giving people money in their pockets. Those are short-term answers. The solution is the tried and tested one of creating jobs through investment, and it will be private investment that will really create the big jobs. And I would also, where I would disagree with Mr. Agarwal and to some extent with Mr. Ashwani Mahajan, is that yes, jobs have to come from manufacturing. They'll also come from services, by the way, and high-end and low-end services. But frankly, the big jobs that we want, that China got, those big jobs are going to come when our companies join the global supply chains. There's a
Okay.
huge potential of that. And high tariffs. I appreciate your point about the PLI, the productivity link scheme, etc. They're useful and they will give us good results. But we must make our country competitive. Vietnam today is eating our lunch in many
Yeah.
sectors. And
Okay, I'm
so,
sorry. Yeah,
yeah, go
sorry
ahead.
to rush
Anyway,
you
I made
along.
my
Yeah.
exports. No country became prosperous without exports. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay, Ashwani Mahajan, last comments. Dr. Mahajan.
Yeah, I mean, we should understand this point that the period which we are talking about, the growth, it was also a pandemic period. And if in during this period where there was a partial lockdown, if the economy has done better, numbers are showing, that is something really remarkable. And
Okay.
since time is not there, I won't answer to Gusharanji's points. But anyways, sometime more we will.
We'll have a
And
separate. Yeah,
there is
we'll have a
always a,
separate. Sorry.
yeah. So I think economy is recovering, and numbers are showing. And in fact, numbers are speaking. I don't have to speak about this.
Okay. Okay.
Professor Arun Kumar may be right in his own way, but the numbers which are showing in terms of the production of steel or cement or construction numbers or manufacturing numbers, these numbers themselves are showing that yes, we are recovering, and soon we will come out of this pandemic problem.
Okay. I literally 30 seconds to Anshul and Avijit, and I'll give Mr. Agarwal the last word. Professor Kumar, biggest concern for you right now, Arun Kumar.
Yeah, so biggest concern is that we need to put money in the hands of people who've lost employment and incomes. That means government expenditure has to go up. And in the short run, that's good, but in the long run, we have to create productive employment, because in the immediate, we cannot do that. We need to strengthen the rural employment guarantee scheme and create an urban guarantee scheme also. And also, I think what I'd like to point out is that the pricing power of the corporate sector, because of which inflation is taking place, we need to do something about that. And the unorganized sector, which is suffering, and the micro sector, let me say, has 99% of the units and 97.5% of the employment. Now, if we don't revive the micro sector, then there's no employment generation. And that is, something that we need to do.
Okay, Anshul, very quickly.
Yeah, well, I completely endorse Mr. Kumar's point. But to Mr. Das's point about, the industries are, no companies investing actually in jobs and output. In fact, they're deleveraging. They're taking money from the banks at low interest rates because of the loose and accommodative monetary policy and using it to settle their debts. That's not happening at all. So there is no other solution except demand side economics at this point, because this loose monetary policy is deepening the divide between the formal and the informal sector. It's rising to, it's increasing, inflation is increasing, and the booming the stock markets are not a reflection of a robust economy, nor are the booming art sales. That's no one talks about, but my deepest interest is in art. So the Tayyab Mehtas and the Hussains are selling really well because there's so much of money, liquidity in the market at that level, and that shows the kind of deepening divide.
I think that's a very important point, Mr. Agarwal. Very quick last word to you. A widening inequality, a concern that the person at the bottom of the ladder, as is reflected in the prices of the cooking gas hike, is where the structural issues with the economy are. Last word, sir.
Barkha, there are two issues. One thing is, if you want inclusive growth, you need to increase the size of the cake. Unless you create wealth, you cannot just distribute it. So our focus is on two sides. One thing is economic growth. We are right to center, follow right to center policy. We are pro-business, pro-industry. So the main focus is on economic growth and increasing the size of the cake. Then the second part also comes, which is very important, is about the distribution of wealth, so that the lower strata people, etc., get concentration of wealth is a problem whenever.
What is your
so
view
the
on
government schemes? We are increasing and using technology for. If you see the digital initiatives, e-rupee, various we can call on several. Those are for increasing efficiency in distribution. Government has come out with very good scheme for street vendors, etc. And our focus is from now just 30 seconds more. From informal sector to the formal sector. Last point I just would like to mention is from Gurcharan Singh ji, Arun ji and Ashwani Mahajan ji is that the corporate profits have increased because of certain problems in the FTA and other things. POG has just now said that we want to rework the FTA so that we integrate our manufacturing into regional and global supply chain, as well as the anomalies which had been created earlier in the FTA, that also will be checked. So bilateral trade agreement, etc., are also our focus. So these things are in our knowledge. We are working on them, and these GDP, etc., figures at present show only the direction of the recovery. We are not saying that everything has recovered.
Sure. I think we'll have a separate conversation on petrol and cooking gas prices, and we'll have you all back. For now, leaving it there to Professor Kumar, Dr. Avijit, Dr. Mahajan, Gurcharan Das, and Gopal ji. Thank you, Gopal Krishna Agarwal of the BJP, and to our audience, thank you for watching. Goodbye. It's great to see you here. Thank you for watching our work. If you haven't subscribed yet, don't forget to click the bell icon and subscribe to Mojo Story and support independent, robust journalists.